Conversations bring together the biggest names in true crime, recorded live at CrimeCon London, partnered by CBS Reality. For more information on future CrimeCon events, visit crimecon.co.uk.
How are you all? I hope you're all okay. Thank you so much for joining us today. I don't know if all of you have listened to our podcast before, or if this is the first time you're hearing about it, but my name's Cherry. I'm one of the hosts of a podcast called Crimepedia, which is a weekly podcast in which we will concentrate on unsolved cases and cold cases that need some help. It wouldn't normally be the sort of case that you would find in the general media. We like to help families that need a little bit of help in getting their story out there and getting more ears and eyes onto cases and passing on information to law enforcement. My co-host is Morgan. He's come all the way from Ohio in America. Yeah, it's come a long way, bless him.
There we go.
If you see him by the bar, please return him to somebody responsible. Don't leave him on his own by the bar. And with us today is a lady called Sue. She is Stuart Lubbock's ex-wife, and she's kindly agreed to come with us and to talk to us today to give you guys an insight into the truth of this case. You may have seen this case in the newspaper. You may be old enough to remember it the first time round, or you might be reading about it now as a new case that you've never heard of before. So we're going to give you, we've only got 40 minutes, so we haven't got a huge amount of time to go through absolutely everything with you. But we're going to try and condense it as much as we can to give you some information, because there's a lot of stuff online which is untrue, and there's a lot of stuff online that doesn't make sense, and we're going to try and give you factual stuff about this case for you to then go away and have a look at it. And the way we look at it is that every single pair of eyes in this room is a brand new set of eyes on this case. And you might have thoughts and you might have feelings about this case that somebody else hasn't thought of. And to us, that's a massive bonus, because it gets more people looking at Stuart's case and hopefully will bring an answer to his family. Ready? We're ready. Okay. So on the 31st of March 2001, Stuart Lubbock attended a party in Roydon in Essex. This was the house of a very well-known personality, TV personality, somebody who was probably a household name at the time, I would say, when I was growing up. There were 8 people other than Stuart at that party. Only one person left that party harmed. The other 8 people walked away from that party. The person that left that party in a huge state of distress and in a huge state of hurt was Stuart Lubbock. We wanted to talk about the things that, in this case, I think are really important for you to know. Now, my friend Stephen, who is probably here somewhere, has got a book. He is a former Scotland Yard detective, and he talks about the 5WH principle. This is the who, the what, the when, the where, and the why, and the how. We can't give you the answer to all of those, but we're going to try and give you the answer to most of them. So Stuart Lubbock was a 31-year-old meat factory worker. He was a father of 2 young girls. He and his current partner had split up, and he was now a single man. The incident occurred at 4 Beaumont Drive in Roydon, which is the home of Michael Barrymore. This brings us to the what happened and how it happened. Stuart and his brother were on a night out at the Millennium nightclub in Harlow. Stuart was invited back to Michael Barrymore's house for a party. And we look at the timeline. It started at about 2:30. Stuart, a guy called Justin, who is a friend of Michael's, and his sister Kylie, who was Justin's sister, all got in a taxi and went back to Michael Barrymore's house. Between 3 and 4, Michael's partner, a man called Jonathan Kenny, 2 of Kylie's friends, 2 young girls, a girl called Kelly Campbell and a girl called Claire Jones, all arrived back to Michael Barrymore's house. There then became 2 other friends, a guy called Simon Shaw and a guy called James Futers. This is all the people that were at the party that night. Now, we know from statements that there was a lot of alcohol consumed at this party. Although there are statements in the press saying that there were no drugs at this party, we know that there were drugs at this party. We know that this was happening. That's not the point to this, but we know that it was happening, even though it's still being denied to this day. We also know that around 5:10 a.m., Jonathan Kenny, Michael Barrymore's partner, called Mike Brown, who was Michael Barrymore's agent. 38 minutes later, at 5:48 a.m., he called 999. So there's a big timeline difference. 48 minutes to call 999, which was the first thing that raised a massive red flag to me, is that why wait such a long time to phone for help? This is the thing where it gets kind of confusing for us, because when we looked at the witness statements of all the people that were there that night, the witness statements don't they don't corroborate each other. Am I right in saying that? They don't really corroborate each other for that night.
Sorry, not at all.
No. So we're going to talk a bit about Stuart to start with. We now know what happened. We now know that where it all happened. So we're going to talk about Stuart. So Sue's going to tell us a bit about Stuart. What kind of guy was Stuart?
Right, Stuart was, I suppose now if you used to look at a typical Essex boy, just out there, drinking, flirting, just being a ladies' man, that was Stuart. I met him when I was 15. We got married when I was 18. 19. 19? Got married. We split up. It wasn't because of him, it was because of me. We just wanted different ways. I just wanted to live my life, like just explore and everything else. He wanted to more settle down, be a family, and he was just a hard worker. There was nothing bad about him. No one's got anything negative to say about him. Everything's just positive, and he was always smiling. He wouldn't really get angry, upset, anything like that. And he just loved his family and just worked hard.
So we know that Stuart didn't know Michael Barrymore as a friend.
No, not
so. He only knew him from being in the club and seeing him and going, oh my God, Michael Barrymore's over there. You know, like most people were doing that night in the club.
Yeah, that night as well. A lot of people, because Stuart and Kevin went together, and Kevin went home, but that was a normal thing for them to do.
Kevin is Stuart's brother.
So Kevin just went home and Stuart would go off and do whatever he did. If he met a girl or something like that, he would always make sure he walked home with them and made sure that they were safe getting home. So that was a normal thing.
See them there, nice guy, cheeky chappy. There is a documentary, I think it's on All 4, isn't it?
Yeah.
Channel 4 or All 4. There's a documentary called Body in the Pool. I recommend you watch it. It's a great documentary, and you can see Sue's wedding video, and then you can see just how young they were when they got married. It's lovely. It's really, really nice to see the footage of them both on their wedding day. It's lovely. So we know that they all went back in a taxi. We had Michael Barrymore, we had Justin Merritt, we had Kylie Merritt, and we had Stuart in the taxi. They all went back to Michael's house. Mm-hmm. So we know that, like I said to you, we've looked over the witness statements, I don't know how many times, and it's very difficult to get a correlation on them. And I know that in situations like that, we know that people panic. People don't recall the same amount of things. A lot of alcohol was consumed that night. Drugs were consumed that night. So people's perceptions of what was happening, where it was happening, are not going to be all the same. But when you read through these, they don't correlate at all. They don't make sense. For instance, James Futers, one of the guests there, and his friend Simon said that as they were coming outside into the swimming pool area, they were in a room with Michael Barrymore at the time. They then left that room, came outside, and saw something in the bottom of the pool. Now, James says that he saw something, thought it was strange, and then Simon jumped in and tried to get the person out. We know now that this person was Stuart. But we then see that Michael Barrymore says that he came out and Stuart was floating in the pool, face up, and then somebody jumped in to get them out, but he couldn't remember who jumped in to get who out. Mm-hmm. So that was the two first things that we looked at that didn't really make a lot of sense to us. We also had a difference between Justin's testimony and also his sister's, Kylie's. Because when you read through them, Justin says that he was in a bedroom talking to Jonathan for about 20 minutes. They said that they were in the jacuzzi with Stuart, but they got cold. They got on, left the jacuzzi and left Stuart in the jacuzzi, as far as we know. They were then in a bedroom talking together for 20 minutes. And then Michael came in and said to them, someone's drowning in the pool. And then Jonathan is in the room, but then in the next statement, he's attending to Stuart with Kylie. Yeah, it's very, very confusing. So trying to sort of put this case together is very difficult. It's trying to get a timeline of what everybody says happened is really hard. We know that the two girls were in the kitchen. They didn't see what happened. From their statements, they don't know what happened. They came out and everything was all happening after them. And as soon as Stuart was discovered and they were attending to Stuart, then panic ensued and Michael left.
Yes, Michael left with James and Simon.
So I think Simon lived just down the road, didn't he? So he left the scene before the ambulance and before the police got to the house.
Yeah.
Okay.
Now, you said that there was 48 minutes between them finding Stuart and them calling 999.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Do we know if there were any other phone calls that were made in between those times?
Not as far as we know.
So when the ambulance arrived on scene, they took Stuart to the Princess Alexandra Hospital in Harlow. Now, when he arrived, his temperature was 29 degrees. So very, very low temperature, which you would expect for it being March, the fact that he was in a swimming pool. There are differences, again, with the statements in that some people say he was wearing shorts, other people say he was wearing boxers, whether they mean the same things, but the shorts that they were described in some of them are totally different to the boxer shorts that are described in other statements. Now, they were given... We've spoken to some A&E nurses just this week to clarify what would happen when somebody is presented to A&E on the assumption that they were drowning. When the ambulance got there, they were called to... It was Justin that called the ambulance, wasn't it? So when Justin called the ambulance, he called and he rang and said, there's a geezer in the pool. And we think he's drowned. Not sure. And then he starts talking about how this is the first night out he's had in ages and it had to all go wrong because this is the only weekend he hasn't got his kids. And he's telling the guy on the 999 call that, I don't know, I can't believe this. I haven't been out in ages.
Yeah, he said, I think the geezer's dead, mate.
Yeah. So the ambulance obviously came and we've looked through the ambulance report and they are obviously on scene at what they think is a drowning. When Stuart gets to hospital and we spoke to the A&E nurses, obviously not connected with this case, but we spoke to them to see what procedure is like. I spoke to 3 different nurses from 3 different hospitals and they all said the same thing. They said that if somebody is presented as a drowning, and if there's any A&E nurses in the crowd, I'm sure you'll probably agree, that is what they're initially treated for. That's what they've come in for. They'll treat them, they'll try and get their temperature back up to normal, and then they will start to then look over the person to see if there's any other injuries. But predominantly, the focus is trying to get them warm, trying to get them back to a normal state. And I asked if the person has any injuries, how, internal injuries or, intimate injuries, is there a chance you could miss it? And all 3 of them said yes. There is a chance that you could miss it because you're focusing on other things. Now, we know from the reports that there were 14 rectal thermometer insertions. If you've ever seen a rectal thermometer that is used in A&E, you'll know that it's a long, thin tube that they insert to take their body's internal temperature. They were unable to start Stuart's heart again following this, and unfortunately, at 8:20 a.m. that morning, Stuart passed away. After speaking to the A&E department and the nurses, I asked them about the issues with post-mortems. Now, we know that from people that are, I don't know how to explain it, for people that are not agreeing with us on the way we think about this case, let's put it that way, so people that are on a different camp to us will say, these injuries were caused at the hospital. These injuries were caused by the nurses and doctors. These injuries were caused after he left that house. What do you think about that, Sue?
Stuart was actually bleeding and there was blood-soaked towels by the pool. They haven't been recovered since that night. Stuart's injuries were so severe. There's basically no way. I mean, a dead body doesn't bleed either or bruise. So there's no way all these injuries occurred after his death.
And like a trigger warning for you, but obviously you're all adults, you're at crime convention, so you do understand that there are going to be disturbing things that we're going to talk about. Stuart's injuries were so severe that the pathologist, 3 of the 4 pathologists that carried out post-mortems on Stuart all said that those injuries would have caused him a significant amount of pain. They are not the sort of injuries that he would have consented to. They are not the sort of injuries that would have been inflicted willingly having this done to him, because people have suggested that perhaps this was a erotic game that went wrong. And this is not something that the pathologists, 3 of the 4 pathologists agree with. The first pathologist was a guy called Michael Heath. Michael Heath did the first post-mortem, and he believed that it was all consistent with drowning. Everything was fine. There was no issues. That was his cause of death. Now, he was actually found guilty of gross misconduct, not on this case, but afterwards. So can we believe everything he says? It's up to you to make that decision. The second post-mortem was carried out by a forensic pathologist, which is always good in a case like this, because obviously they look into things a lot further than a normal pathologist would. And he disagreed. He said there are injuries here that are not consistent. There were injuries on Stuart's body on the second post-mortem that weren't apparent on the first. Or he's picked them up and the first guy didn't. And when he came through and said, look, this isn't consistent with a drowning. So the police then got another forensic pathologist who was an expert in drowning. And this was a guy called, who was he? He was called, I forget his name. But he was the third pathologist. Do you remember? And he...
Ian Calder.
Huh?
Ian Calder.
Ian Calder. And so he then said, there are no classic signs of drowning. In a classic sign of drowning, the lungs can sometimes overlap in the chest. He said that the blood... there was a cloth wrapped around Stuart, and that there was blood in that cloth that was originally wrapped around his pelvic region. He said he had extensive anal hemorrhaging. He had clear, horrific anal injuries, and this is not something Stuart would have done to himself, and this is not something that would have happened accidentally, because there was talk that Stuart was dive bombing into the swimming pool and that he caused these injuries himself. Absolutely not.
Sherry, I asked you this earlier. Can you explain a little bit about this overlapping lungs?
Yeah, so in your chest cavity, in a lot of, I've looked and spoken to somebody about this, in a lot of cases where people have drowned, where the lungs have expanded so much and filled with water, there's not enough room in your chest for them to be where they are, and so that they start to overlap. And this is a classic sign when the lungs have moved and have overlapped. It's a classic sign in a lot of drownings. And so this is something that he would have particularly looked for. And in Stuart's case, it wasn't the case. There was no signs of that. Now, we know obviously there were what you would call like foam in the lungs. And this is a typical thing that is with drowning. But remember, they were giving him CPR. And so this is another thing. Within CPR, you can also get this like foamy kind of liquid that will come from the lungs too. The police then instructed a fourth pathologist, a guy called Professor Jack Crane. He agreed with the previous 2. So he disagreed with the first one. He believed that Stuart was a victim of a serious sexual assault. He said that the widening of the anal cavity was consistent with a large object, such as a bottle, a fist, a dildo, something that had been forced in there. It was inserted forcefully. It wasn't something that was done consensually. And he couldn't find any circumstances where this would have been a consensual act. And this was really important for us, because if you look at this as a simple case in that 9 people are at a party, somebody is found in the pool, you can understand. Somebody's had too much drink, fallen in the pool, fine. When somebody's got this amount of injuries, yet nobody in the whole house knows what happened, you've got to start to think to yourself, is everybody telling the truth? Is everybody telling everything they know? And from this, it doesn't add up that they are. There's a letter that you'll see on, there's different appreciation societies that you'll see on Twitter and you'll see on TikTok and Instagram. And you'll see this letter that is written by it's the Home Office, isn't it? And it's this letter that's addressed to the chief superintendent, where they say they cannot pin Stuart's death or injuries on any one person at that party, which is completely fair enough. There's no evidence. Now, the evidence at the scene, the Stuart's injuries are consistent with a few things at the scene that are now missing. The police Essex police originally looked at this as a drowning. They were called to say someone's had an accident in the pool. That's how they looked at it. They didn't look at it as a crime scene at all. And so people were allowed to come and go from this scene. They were allowed to come in. They were allowed to clean up. Michael Barrymore's agent came in and he was able to remove things from the house. And these things are pictured in the police photos, but have never been seen since. One of which was a pool thermometer, which is a floating device, which is like flat at the top and then it's long and quite fat at the bottom. No one's ever seen it since. So who would take a pool thermometer? Why would you remove a pool thermometer from a scene? Why would you do that? There's no reason for it. There have been arrests in the case. I don't think we're going to have enough time to go through them all, but there have been arrests in the case, and nobody so far has been held accountable for anything. No. So our remaining question for this is, why did this happen? For Stuart's family, Stuart's dad sadly has since passed away. Why did this happen? We don't know. That's something that we can't give you at the moment. It's not something that we can tell you. But going back to our who, what, where, when, why, if we go back to what can we do as decent human beings? What can we do to help Stuart's case? What is going to be the thing, do you think, that's going to help with this?
We just need more coverage. I believe out of them 8 people over 22 years, someone has told somebody, either a drunken night or anything, a loved one, an ex, somebody must have told somebody what happened. And we need to reach out to the right people to come forward with any kind of information that can help us. Because the 8 people that night, they're not going to say anything, but someone needs to hopefully come forward with the right information to help.
So there's another podcast that you can listen to, which is Sue was on, by our lovely friend down there. There's a podcast called His Name Was Stuart Lubbock. And so you can listen to that wherever you get your podcast. That's a series that she did with Sue, and that's full of information. There's a documentary, The Body in the Pool. You can watch that one and you can have a look at information there. By all means, you can contact us and ask any questions. Has anybody got any questions before we go anyway? Was there something else removed from the crime scene? Yes, there was. So the other thing missing was a handle to a shed, wasn't it?
There was a door handle, but also it's been mentioned by one of the guests that night, there was a hairbrush as well that's gone missing.
Anyone else?
Yeah. Was it noisy? Was the party noisy? Because I think Stuart must have suffered so much and he must have screamed out in pain. Why didn't anybody hear it?
The neighbours did say that they heard some screams that night, but they didn't know if it was the girls screaming once they knew Stuart was by the pool or if it was Stuart. There was music on, but it wasn't a party. It was more like just a gathering with the 8 people. So it wasn't loud.
There's somebody lying. There's more than one person lying.
Oh, yes.
And we just hope and pray that one day their conscience will make them.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
I was just wondering, with sort of Michael Barrymore getting some more fame again as well, especially through TikTok, does he have the same agent that he had back then when this happened? Do you know? Is he is he being spoken to about coming clean again?
He won't.
I invited him today.
He won't speak about anything. He won't put out the appeal. No, nothing at all. He's been on live telly saying that he hasn't seen any of the guests or speaking to any of the guests since that night. In the statements we have got, some of the guests went round to his house in the August afterwards. No, he actually got prompted to call his agent once he got to Simon and James's flat. We don't know much about it, just that his agent went round there and cleaned up.
Took things away.
But they all had mobile phones. All the other guests had mobile phones. Why didn't one of them do 999? For God's sake, what's going on there?
Yeah, you're right. The other thing I want to just quickly say before I answer your question, Sue has never accepted any money ever to talk about this case, ever. She's doing this because of Stuart. And she's never accepted any money. I can't say the same thing for the other people that were at that party. So I would just like to say that, in that this woman for the past 22 years has been making it her mission to get justice for Stuart. And she fights and she gets a whole tirade of abuse and things like that. And for an ex-wife, I don't think I'd be doing that for my ex-husband, So all credit goes to her. She is a fantastically strong and amazing woman who I've got so much admiration for.
I believe I know who the main person is, and maybe somebody that helped him, and I believe a few other people know as well from that night.
So for me, before Cherry did this case, I had no idea who Michael Barrymore was. And what's really upsetting to me with this case is, in talking about it, I've had a few people ask, like, what is your live show? And I said, oh, it's about Stuart Lubbock. And I get blank faces. But as soon as I say Michael Barrymore, immediately know. So the idea that this has turned into Barrymore's case and not Stuart Lubbock's case is very, very disturbing to me.
I don't know if any of you have watched The Body in the Pool, but right at the very end, it was a week before the documentary aired, Michael Barrymore changed and he said that he believes Stuart got the injuries by slipping by the pool edge. And that's how he injured himself.
Although there's nothing on his shorts to say that anything went through his shorts. So unless he did it completely naked, then got up and put his shorts back on, I find that really hard to believe. Well, thank you so much for joining us. Thank you very, very much for joining us.
You've been listening to Crime Conversations, recorded live at CrimeCon, partnered by CBS Reality. For more information on future CrimeCon events, visit crimecon.co.uk.